Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to this series of talks about the Dharma. In the last one, we looked at what was called the first turning of the Wheel of Dharma, the first of the three main phases of the Buddha's teaching. And today we'll go on to look briefly at the second major turning of the Wheel of Dharma, the one that gave us Mahayana Buddhism. The teachings on this fill hundreds of volumes, and the Buddha spent many years telling us about the details. So, of course, this is a simple overview. If we want to put the second turning in a nutshell, then what should we know? We should know that it carries on from the first turning. It takes the Buddha's teaching further. And even that fact in itself is very interesting, because the Buddha only took his teachings on to the next step once he'd very firmly established the first step, the Four Noble Truths. We don't need to go back to that, but we do need to know that this understanding of suffering and the nature of suffering and its causes and how to get beyond it is the very basis for all of the Buddha's teaching. So that needed to be very well established, practiced, understood from A to Z. But once that was the case, then the Buddha's audience, the bhikkhus, the meditators around him, were ready, some of them, not all of them, some of them, to hear the next step. If we sum it up, we can do so under two very general headings: wisdom and compassion. The Buddha moved the wisdom teachings significantly forward and really developed the teachings on compassion, which had always been there, but which now needed to come very much to the fore. They're two very general terms, so let's explore them to the next level of depth. In the first phase of the teaching, the Buddha had taught what we call wisdom, mainly in terms of the voidness of ego, the fact that there is no lasting, eternal Ken Holmes and each and every one of us that lasts more than the sun and the moon and the planets and the universes, somehow an eternal me and eternal you. The Buddha said that this idea, which was prevalent at the time, was not the case. And he showed that we are changing. We are each a unique story, oh yes, but a changing story. And how we change is determined by the karma that we make. Every day we are, in some ways, writing the story of our tomorrows and of our next lives. So all of that was explained in the first turning. But as far as the wisdom goes, the main point is to show what we really are. Not a lasting, cast in stone, eternal self, but a changing, an ever-changing story of karma. That looks this way. It takes our observations inside to answer the question, who am I? What am I? So now in the second turning, the Buddha's teachings turn outwards to use the same type of system of inquiry, of clear investigation, to try to understand what is this world, this universe that we experience. And just as with the voidness of ego, we see that inside is not quite as it seems. Although we feel like there's some lasting me, when we examine, we never find it. So the same out there. People seem to us at times more fixed than they are. They too are changing. And all of the phenomena of the universe are changing, but not only are they changing, they're not at all what they seem to be. So the second phase of the Buddha's teaching is about the voidness of each and everything, not just the ego. Of course, that covers everything. One can't go any further in terms of voidness. And voidness, as always, takes us to the truth of the matter and explodes the delusions, the illusions. It shows us how to discover what's really there, not to just accept some idea of what's really there because the Buddha said, but how to investigate, how to look for ourselves, to discover the truth of the matter, to find out what is illusion and what is reality. That's one aspect of the second turning. The other aspect is that of compassion. Through the first turning teachings, and in particular the instructions on meditation and on shamatha and peacefulness and on the Four Truth, the Buddha shows us how we can go beyond the illusion of ego and how that will liberate all of our own suffering. But in the second turning, which looks outwards and that looks at everything in the universe, then the question comes up, but what can we do to liberate the suffering of each and every being, our brothers, our sisters, our mothers and fathers of past lives? What can we do to help them? Of course, if we free ourselves from our own suffering, it sets a good example to the world of someone who is no longer causing harm, someone who is at peace, someone who has found a happiness that lasts, that comes from the inside, and that doesn't depend on other people, doesn't depend on changing phenomena. That's a helpful example. But then there is just so much suffering out there on every level. Physical suffering, mental suffering, existential suffering, just the suffering of being what so many beings are, in wretched states, some of them. In the second turning, the Buddha shows us how we can step by step learn to be of more and more use to this world. And in particular, he shows how a Buddha's enlightenment, not just liberation from one's own samsara, but a Buddha's enlightenment, is the greatest gift we can give to everyone. If we become enlightened, then like the Buddha, our lives can be helpful to billions of people, just like Lord Buddha, through what he did, so simply, with his 3 robes and his begging bowl and his meditation. His life has benefited billions upon billions of people for thousands of years. Who can say that much? So in the second turning, out of compassion, we learn to first long to become Buddhas, and then to actually work with everything we are and our lives and our karma so that we can actually become Buddhas in order to help each and every sentient being. And all of those teachings about developing the motivation and then the actual practice, what we need to do, are under the heading of compassion in general, but under the heading of this very special word, bodhicitta. We become bodhisattvas, those longing to become enlightened to help everyone. And the way we do that is through practicing bodhicitta, this very special state of mind, attitude, whereby our Dharma practice is not just for self-liberation and shamatha and finding more and more peace for ourselves, but it's about dealing with life, engaging, not retreating, but engaging, and finding peace in whatever we do. Not an artificial peace inside, but a state where we are at peace, no matter what, no matter with whom. So there we have those two main axes of the second turning of the Wheel of Dharma. If we return to the first one, wisdom, and we remember that the Buddha is addressing this audience which has already heard and practiced the Four Noble Truths, then we see that one of the major tasks that the Buddha needs to do is to show the voidness of all of the Buddhism that his disciples had learned so far. The famous Heart Sutra, which many of you may have heard, read, recited, the one that starts, no eye, no ear, no nose, and it's a long list of no, 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 no. That one sums up this reflection on the nature of the Buddhist teachings of the first turning. So what does it mean? Using those teachings, people have got out of their ego. And in particular, they got into a mindset of no ego. They got out of clinging to things and to people as though they lasted, by telling themselves again and again, impermanence, impermanence, impermanence. They had shed their addiction for worldly happiness, which comes with such an expensive price tag, by telling themselves, suffering, suffering, suffering. In so doing, day after day, week after week, year after year, the Buddhist terminology and ideas have become very solid. And all the details of it as well, the 12 links of interdependence, the way one analyzes consciousness, contact, desire, clinging, all of the steps that lead to samsara, all of that terminology, sometimes very extensive, have become their new reality. They got out of worldliness and they've become Buddhists living in a world of impermanence, suffering, no self, and all the rest of it. It's not very fair, but I'd like to share a little sort of cartoon image that I have in my mind when I think of that. I think of a grumpy old Buddhist who all the time is muttering under his breath. Suffering, suffering, suffering. Impermanent, impermanent, impermanent. And so on. That person's head, that person's mind is filled with these realities that are, what are they? What are they? They are non-things, impermanent. No self. The absence of something is not a reality. Is that where we're going as Buddhists? To end up in ideas of nothing there? No suffering, no self, no lasting. And what are those ideas? They're just thoughts. They're not realities. And one cannot be in a state of no ego. It makes no sense at all. It makes sense when it's a remedy, when ego is the problem, so many self-centered, selfish thoughts. So then one keeps reminding myself, but there is no ego. It's a useful remedy. And all of those teachings are remedies, but they are not realities. They're mindsets, thoughts, and thoughts have no substance whatsoever. they're even less substantial than the morning mists. And the Buddha taught this. He taught these Buddhists in their world of no self and impermanence and so on. He taught them there is no reality in those things. As they're observing their visual consciousness, he says, no I. As they're listening to sounds, as interdependence, he says, no sound. And so on through all of the list of things. This was probably quite a big shock for them. But a shock that's necessary so that they understood mind itself. And it's only by understanding mind itself truthfully, fully, and the power of thought, and the limits of thought, and the nature of thought, the real truth can be found. So in the voidness teachings of the second turning, the Buddha not only shows how nothing is real in a lasting way. Nothing is real and exists in its own right, because everything depends on other things to be what it is. That very fact of depending on other things, that very fact means nothing is in its own right. This movie you're watching in this moment, even though you're watching a screen, depends on the screen, on the electronics, on the light waves, on your eyesight. The end result that you're experiencing in your mind depends on so many things. So what you're seeing seems real, but it's not something that exists all by itself when you're not looking, for instance. When you're not looking, it doesn't exist as you experience it. It's a big topic. It's a big topic. But the Buddha taught how nothing exists in its own right because everything depends. And this applies to the teachings of the first turning of the Wheel of Dharma. That those things, like everything, are merely a way of positioning the mind, a thought, a reference, a shape of the mind, a form of the mind. And that the mind itself is not a something, cannot be found, devoid of any entity. Now the teachings about the voidness of everything, of mind and what it experiences, they're very complicated, they're very deep. I can't describe them to you now. It's just to tell you that second turning of the Wheel of Dharma is all about those various steps of voidness, 16 types of voidness, 20 types of voidness. It thoroughly explores the void nature of all things. For the compassion, there are the teachings of bodhicitta. They fall into two main areas: absolute bodhicitta, relative bodhicitta. The absolute bodhicitta is very much linked to the void nature of things. And it's a compassion for beings, because one understands the void nature of things that they don't understand. And that's why beings suffer through their illusions. That's the deep compassion, the ultimate bodhicitta. And then the relative bodhicitta is about how to become a Buddha, to help all beings, and of course all beings includes oneself. We're part of all beings. The relative bodhicitta, the relative mind set on enlightenment, if we translate it that way, the relative bodhicitta itself falls into two vital parts that both need to be there. First, the aspiration, the state of mind that loves everyone so much and has so much compassion for all of the suffering, that one just longs and longs for one thing alone, which is to have a pure, strong, enlightened mind, so as to be able to do something to help. That's the motivation, the aspiration. But by itself, it's not enough. One just becomes somebody with an excellent and pure and noble longing. One needs to actually do what needs to be done. And that is very, very hard, to live compassionately in the world, helping people. It's very difficult. One needs skills. One needs to learn how to give oneself, not just a bit, but more and more. One learns how to be ethical in every circumstance. One needs such forbearance, such tolerance and patience to put up with all the difficulties, to deal with people in all of their complexity and their complex situations. One needs diligence, joy, the joy of doing it, even though it is so hard and so long-winded. And one needs the power of meditation to give one the strength and the insight to do it, and one needs wisdom all the time. The 6 paramitas are what one actually needs to do. They are the training when the 6 paramitas, generosity, right conduct, forbearance, diligence, meditation, wisdom, when they're complete, one is Buddha. One is fully equipped to help all beings, and one's mind is as perfect as it can be. And so the Buddha taught the relative and the ultimate bodhicitta. And he showed us that this compassion needs to be the very ground that's there in the first place, as we pursue those teachings that he unveiled in the second turning. And why is this? It's very important. If the voidness teachings come first and they're not properly understood, we can understand how everything is illusion. And we may just dismiss people, beings, the world, as illusions and deluded beings. One could just see everything as absurd, which it is in a way. But when the compassion comes first, then one feels for each being in their illusion, as though they're your best friend, as though they are your mother and father from former lives. One cares for them so much that as one understands more and more the power of the illusions, then that reinforces the compassionate wish to work within those illusions, because that's what you have to do. You have to enter into their world of illusions without losing a vision of truth, to be able to help them. So it is very important, very, very important that compassion, relative bodhicitta, comes first. That's it for today's talk. It is very brief because the details are just enormous. They are what we study in our lifetime of practice as a Mahayana Buddhist. And that was about the second turning of the Wheel of Dharma. We still have the third turning, which is about Buddha nature, and in which the Buddha shares with us the last and third chapter of what he has to show us, and that he can only share once not only the first phase of teachings has been in place and understood, but now this second phase about the voidness of all things and the total absolute need for compassion has been well understood and put in place. Then the Buddha can teach us about Buddha nature, which is the ultimate form of voidness. As ever, it's such a pleasure to share these teachings, simple as they may be, with you. And I wish you, each and every one, a wonderful, wonderful day wherever you are, in the beauty and the joy of Dharma. Thank you.